Let's see, when's the last?
Good morning. I am Dr. James Thompson, Jr., Superintendent of Bloomfield Public Schools. On behalf of the Bloomfield Board of Education, I welcome you from throughout the nation to the Dr. Ernest E. Just Symposium. African American scientists of note, it is an honor to join the Institute for Cross-Cultural Awareness and Transformative Education. The African American Studies program at Central Connecticut State University and Tau Iota chapter Omega Psi Phi fraternity. Today, we're here to commemorate African American excellence in science, biology, and research. We are honoring outstanding scientists who have distinguished themselves in their respective endeavors and made unique contributions to mankind. I believe that learning about these individuals will demonstrate to students in Bloomfield, CC, SU, and beyond that it is possible to overcome obstacles to become medical doctors, scientists, and researchers. Dr. Benjamin Foster Jr., our facilitator, will direct today's program activities.
Good morning, all. To the participants of this symposium, please know that the contributions of African Americans to the body of scientific knowledge has been astronomical, yet largely unknown. Dr. Ernest Just's vast contribution to cell biology, highly significant and not widely acknowledged. Today we honor Dr. Just and salute the scientists of note. There are many, many more. We encourage you to learn about these men and women who have made stupendous contributions to this nation for 400 years. Wherever you are, clap your hands in the memory and or recognition of the ancestors. Clap your hands. Now it is my privilege and honor to introduce a man who is second in command of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity Incorporated, an international organization founded for African American college men in 1911 with the guidance of Dr. Ernest E. Just. He is one of the founders. The Honorable Ricky Lewis. And I hasten to add, Mr. Lewis is speaking from Los Angeles, California. The Honorable Ricky Lewis has been employed in the aerospace industry for over 37 years. He will present our first award to Dr. Kenneth Manning, an extraordinary scholar and writer. You will learn more about Dr. Manning. He has been at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology for nearly 50 years. So without further ado, I turn the meeting over to the Honorable Ricky Lewis, first Vice Grand Bosses of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. How are you? Dr. Foster?
I'm good, sir, and we thank you for being a part of this symposium.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Dr. Foster. Greetings, everyone, from the blue state of California and home of the City of Champions here in Los Angeles and warm Los Angeles. It's certainly good to be here this morning. Thank you for this opportunity. A very special shout out to the Brothers of Tau Iota chapter. Brothers, we thank you for your service. We thank you for your sacrifice and your service to our great fraternity. And we thank your families for allowing you to serve. In my capacity as first vice grand bosses of Omega Psi Phi fraternity, I salute the sponsors of this tremendous educational activity as well, and we thank you for being participatory today. Dr. Foster, I'm exceptionally pleased and honored that you named this symposium after Dr. Ernest E. Just, who played a critical role in the founding of Omega Psi Phi fraternity on November 17th, 1911 at Howard University. So I thank you for that. Dr. Just, an eminent scientist who dedicated his life to teaching biology and cell research. And we thank Dr. Just for his service, not only to mankind, but to our great fraternity. This award presentation time is here. Dr. Kenneth Manning, it is with immense gratitude that I present you the Ernest E. Just Lifetime Achievement Award, sir. Your 50 years of teaching the history of science at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and your phenomenal biography on Dr. Ernest E. Just entitled The Black Apollo of Science has earned you as follows. And I'm going to read this plaque that I'm going to virtually present to you. The Dr. Ernest E. Just Lifetime Achievement Award is presented to Dr. Keith Manning in recognition of his dedication to conveying the history of science and preserving the life and work of eminent biologist Dr. Ernest Everett Just, given the 17th day of February 2022 from the Institute of Cross-Cultural Awareness and Transformative Education here in Bloomfield, Connecticut. Dr. Manning, thank you. We appreciate you and God bless you, and we thank you for everything you've done for us. And Brother Foster, I yield back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I wish you the very best out in sunny California. We thank you. Let's give Mr. Lewis a very warm round of applause. I believe the time out there is, what is it, 8? Thank you so much. Dr. Mannings, before you come on and say a few words to us, I wanted to acknowledge Dr. Felton O. Bess. Dr. Bess is the director of the African American Studies program at Central Connecticut State University. Dr. Bess, would you greet us?
Greetings to Central Connecticut State University African American Studies Lecture Series, where Dr. Toro is president. Thank you, Dr. Foster, and to Dr. Thompson, who is the superintendent of the Bloomfield Public Schools. We thank so much for having them because we work so closely with them and they work so closely with us, as well as Joseph Wilkinson, who's on the board, Don Harris, and others. Today's event is a wonderful event in which we're looking at these African American scientists of note, which include different individuals as Charles Drew, and then Dr. Jane Cook Wright, and then Dr. Daniel Hell Williams, presented by the former scholars Dr. Martha Harris, Dr. Gloria Brown, and my colleague from the Ohio State University, Dr. Stacy Close. The African American Studies Lecture Series has an annual Carter G. Woodson Lecture Series on an annual basis, of which this is one. And we invite you also to look at our 1619 Journal of African American Studies. So today we're so happy for this event to commemorate and to note these wonderful scholars of science. Last month, we had a wonderful symposium that looked at African-American writers of note, and then we're going to be looking at African-American theologians. Again, welcome to Central Connecticut State University. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. And now, without further ado, it is my great honor and privilege to introduce to some and present to others the great scholar, Dr. Kenneth Manning.
Hello.
He's been at MIT for nearly 50-odd years. Come on, my dear friend. Dr. Manning? Dr. Manning? And come back to him. Dr. Manning, Dr. Manning, I'm trying to call you. We'll get back to you. Okay, so we're so pleased to have with us a very, very busy woman who has taken the time out of her very productive day to share with us some of her thoughts and to receive our acknowledgement. And I want to ask Donald Harris, the president of the Bloomfield Board of Education, a member of the State Board of Education, and the immediate past president of the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, to come forward and introduce our next guest. Donald Harris, man of immense energy.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. I think I used to have a lot of energy, running out as we speak. It is my honor today to be able to present the Dr. Edward Boucher Academic Leadership Award. For those of you not familiar, Dr. Boucher was a man born and raised in the city of New Haven, Connecticut. He attended the Artisan Colored School right there in New Haven that had 30 students and 1 teacher. Somehow, in 1868, he was admitted to the Hopkins School, which is a private school, not public where he was segregated, but a private school. And he finished there and entered Yale University in 1870. He became the first African-American to graduate, and he became the first African-American to earn a PhD at Yale. His career blossomed from there, but because he had to enter the public sector, it got somewhat difficult. He spent a lot of his life teaching at the Institute for Colored Youth, located in Pennsylvania, which is now the home of Cheney University, where he also taught physics and chemistry. So that's the Dr. Edward Boucher. This award today is being presented to Dr. Joanne Berger Sweeney. Now, Dr. Sweeney is an American neuroscientist. She is also the 22nd president of Trinity. She is, more importantly, the first woman and the first African American to hold that position at Trinity. And so it gives me a great deal of pleasure to be one of two presenters to Dr. Sweeney this morning. And I'm going to read the plaque as it is printed. The Institute for Cross-Cultural Awareness and Transformative Education presents the Dr. Edward A. Boucher Academic Leadership Award to Dr. Joanne Berger Sweeney for outstanding achievement in higher education and neuroscience, presented on the 17th day of February 2022 here in Bloomfield, Connecticut, Benjamin Foster Jr., Doctor of Education. Oh, yeah.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I would like to thank the Bloomfield Public Schools, the Institute for Cross-Cultural Awareness, the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, and Tower chapter of Omega Psi Fraternity Incorporated for allowing me to present this award to such an esteemed educator. I am State Representative Bobby Gibson. I represent the 15th District here in Connecticut, but it is my pleasure to speak on behalf of the state as a whole as I present you, Ms. Berger Sweeney, Dr. Berger Sweeney, an official citation from the state of Connecticut, and it hereby reads: the General Assembly official citation introduced by myself, State Representative Bobby Gibson, be hereby known to all that the Connecticut House of Representatives hereby offers sincerest congratulations to Dr. Joanne Berger Sweeney in recognition of your being the president of Trinity College, an outstanding neuroscientist. You are being recognized for your accomplishments and sterling performance. Whereas Dr. Edward A. Boucher was the first African American to earn a doctorate from American University, Yale, in 1876 in physics, you are the first female and African American to lead Trinity College. The people of Connecticut are immensely pleased and appreciate all of your leadership. The entire membership extends its very best wishes on this memorable occasion and expresses a hope of continued success, given the 17th day of February 2022, from the state of Connecticut Capitol, signed by Speaker of the House Matthew Ritter and Secretary of State Denise Merrill. It is my honor to present you this official citation. Dr. Joanne Berger Sweeney.
Good morning. My name is Lyndon Kirkland. I'm a board member for the Institute for Cross-Cultural Awareness, Cultural Union Awareness. And on behalf of the Institute, Dr. Sweeney, first of all, thank you for your significant contribution, your courage, and your leadership in body of science, right? We just want to present you for a total appreciation. This book on the
What is the book?
The book is the Black Apollo of Science, the life of Ernest Everett Just, as written by Dr. Kenneth Manning. So we'll present that to you to add to your library. Just thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. All right. I'm not sure I need that. Can you see me? I can see perfectly. Excellent. All right. So, first of all, what an honor. What an honor it is to be here.
A couple of things, thank you to Dr. Foster, obviously a Trinity alum, of which I am very proud. And I'm very honored to be here with all of you and to accept this on behalf of myself and also on behalf of Trinity College. Now, one thing that I want to share with you that you could not possibly know, and that is that my father was an Omega Psi Phi. So it is particularly an honor to be here at this time. So, what can I say? What can I say to be a part of the Ernest D. Just African American Scientist of Note Symposium? What can I say about following, to perhaps in some small degree, Dr. Boucher's footsteps? He was here at Yale University in Connecticut, which is the oldest institution of higher learning in the state of Connecticut. And I am here representing Trinity College, which is the second oldest after Yale institution here in the state of Connecticut of higher learning. And as was mentioned, I am the first female and the first African American to be president of Trinity College, which next year will turn 200 years old. Receiving this award represents for me full circle, really a full circle moment. From the time I was a teenager growing up in Los Angeles, California, yes, that is the same city in which the LA Rams just recently won the Super Bowl, in case you didn't know. I thought I would mention that. And I have been very fortunate to attend some of the most prestigious institutions in the country, an undergraduate at Wellesley College, a master's of public health from UC Berkeley, and my PhD is from Johns Hopkins University. I have had the opportunity to work with some of the best scientists and the best mentors, I think, in the entire world. I always wanted to be a scientist from the moment I can remember. Now, to some degree, I like to tell people it is because I grew up in a family of lawyers. My father was a lawyer, my two brothers, uncles. My mother had a master's in sociology. So when people asked me, what do you want to be, Joanne? I said, anything but a lawyer. And science seemed to be a really good thing to be and to think about. Now, I left bench science. I was fortunate enough to participate and be actually the person doing the proof of concept work for a drug that then became the second largest Alzheimer's drug in the world. Razodine, I did that as a graduate student. I was at the bench for 2 years at Wellesley College, where I spent most of my career, and also when I was Dean of Arts and Sciences at Tufts University. When I came to Trinity College, I decided to put aside my bench work for a while and go into administration. I, since I've been at Trinity College, have focused my priorities on increasing financial aid so that students across the entire socioeconomic spectrum have an opportunity to study not just STEM fields and science, but the full array of intellectual opportunities that we have. But my priorities, my heart has always been at STEM. Now, we need to create an environment, I think, and understand that all students can succeed in science. There's often a perception that students have to compete to be in science. And you have to be the smartest in your class to be in science. And on top of that, that underrepresented students of color, can't compete in STEM. I believe that we should approach STEM education collaboratively rather than through a competitive funnel, where only those who are perceived to be the best and the brightest from a very young age can enter the STEM field. I think we're missing a lot of talent by our current, more competitive-oriented approach to science education. We need to be more inclusive. We need to help uplift girls and women and underrepresented minorities who have interest in STEM careers in science. Historically, Black colleges, or HBCUs, disproportionately train more Black scientists than white institutions, even though more Blacks go to primarily white institutions. And I think one of their keys to success is fostering this supportive, collaborative educational atmosphere that isn't weeding out individuals. I think that we at primarily white institutions have something to learn, many lessons to learn from our brothers and sisters at HBCUs. And someone once told me that talent is not determined by zip code. That statement really struck with me. And I have tried to use my position as president to enact real change to begin breaking down barriers that prevent young people of color from achieving their full potential. After all, education is the great equalizer. And as president of Trinity College, I have had the opportunity to make an impact on the life of young people, on the history of a nearly 200-year-old institution. And I hope that my leadership and my work inspires future generations of leaders to do the same. So before I close, I want to offer my congratulations to my class of honorees that include the talented and dedicated Dr. Corbett and Professor Manning. Thank you for the important research and work that you have done and for your advocacy and mentorship. I am so honored to share this special day with the two of you. And I also want to thank all of you for this recognition and remind you, talent exists, STEM talent exists across the zip code. Opportunity doesn't always exist in the same way. So here's to opportunity. Thank you very much. Somebody should be tweeting that, and then I'm on social media.
You have to take your mask off.
1, 2, 3.
We got one more this one.
Thank you
Thank
again.
you so much. Thank you. Yes, exactly. Thank you. What an honor.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Let's see. Dr. Mannings. Dr. Mannings, are you able to hear us now? You hear? We can hear, we can't hear you. Say something, please. We need to hear you. Are you unmuted? Unmute.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Wait a minute.
Mute yourself. Unmute yourself. What did you do? Nick, we need some assistance here.
Yeah, I think the issue is that Dr. Manning has his phone in the WebEx as well. So the second he talks, it's coming out of the speaker of his phone into his mic.
I wish it would come off the computer. Yeah.
So Dr. Manning, you're going to need to quit out of your phone through the WebEx, and then there should be like three buttons, three little dots at the bottom that says more options. If you click on that on your computer, you should see a button that says switch audio. And then through there, you should be able to select the speakers for your computer. So there's three dots at the bottom that says more options. We can't hear you.
Dr. Mannings, once you work that out, we'll get back to you. But in the interest of the time that we have, I'm going to move on. And next award recipient, I heard from this morning, Dr. Kismikia S. Corbett. She will not be able to accept her award virtually due to an unforeseen matter that requires her undivided attention. She sends her gratitude for the award and encourages students to become more involved in the sciences and environmental studies. Dr. Walton Brown Foster, Central Connecticut State University, will accept the award on her behalf. Dr. Brown Foster, please come forward. Thank you.
My honor to to accept this award recognition on the behalf of Dr. Kismikia S. Corbett with the Onesimus Superior Service in Scientific Research Award in immense appreciation given February 17th, 2020 by the Institute for Cross-Cultural Awareness and Transformative Education, Bloomfield, Connecticut, Dr. Benjamin Foster Jr., EDD, convener. And I am Dr. Walton Brown Foster, Professor of Political Science here at Central Connecticut State University, and it's so good to see all of you students in the audience. If any of you have received your vaccination for COVID-19, in particular the Moderna version of the vaccine, you owe your lives, possibly, to Dr. Corbett, because it is she who, for many, many years, as a researcher, studied the family of coronaviruses. And as a result, she and her team were able to rapidly produce in record time, on the basis of her decades-long research on this family of viruses, she was able to make history with her team in rolling out and producing and offering the Moderna vaccine for COVID-19. She is an assistant professor of immunology and infectious diseases at Harvard T. Chan School of Public Health and the Schuster assistant president at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute since June 2021. She joined Harvard following 6 years at the Vaccine Research Center at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, National Institutes of Health, based in Bethesda, Maryland. She earned her PhD in microbiology and immunology from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in 2014. She is considered to be one of Time's 100 Next under the category of innovators, and her profile in this honor, given this honor, was written by Dr. Anthony Fauci. Many of you are familiar with Dr. Fauci. She is also one of his colleagues. So I am so very pleased to accept this award on her behalf, and in particular because of what she has done for humanity and each of us individually in protecting our lives against what she's known about a long time before any of us knew about, and that was this family of illnesses, the coronavirus family. So thank you very much on her behalf.
And we thank you. Dr. Kismikia S. Corbett is also near and dear to me because we hail from the same state, North Carolina. Isn't that right, Dr. Best? Okay, we're going to move right along, and we're trying to stay within the time frame that has been allotted to us, and if we go over a little bit, I'm sure you will understand. But Dr. Walter McAfee is considered to be the father of the American space age. For those of us
It's not going to be.
Understand American,
No,
African
but you'll
American.
see the.
Who is that? Dr. Mannings, are you available now? Can you speak? I'm trying to wait a little bit for
I
Dr.
can't hear
Mannings.
them.
Come
The
on
only
in.
way I can hear them is through my phone. I want to hear them and be able to speak. Which speakers? Okay, come on.
Well, let me move on here until they get that squared away. Dr. Walter McAfee has a tremendous impact on America and the world. In 1946, Dr. McAfee developed a mathematical formula to bounce radio waves off the moon. That propelled this nation, and indeed the world, into what is known as the space age. He went on to serve the United States through the U.S. Army Signal Corps for 40-odd years. And although Mr. Selden, he went wrong and he decided to wear the black and gold. We still honor him so very, very much. And he did so very much. And because of that, the Institute for Cross-Cultural Awareness has decided that we're going to devote an entire symposium to Dr. Walter McAfee. He's just that important, and the time that we've allotted just wouldn't do. And so we'll be contacting all of our supporters and contributors when we move on with the life of Dr. Walter McAfee. Just wanted you to know that. I believe that Dr. Mannings, are you ready?
I think so. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Oh, Kenneth is from a native of Dillon, South Carolina, and is so well respected throughout America, especially among the members of Donald Harris's and Dr. Thompson's fraternity, Omega Psi Phi, that we just wanted to make sure that everyone in the nation, and we have people, Dr. Mannings, from throughout the nation who are logged in. Some contacted me moments ago from Virginia saying, get that straightened out so that we can hear Dr. Mannings. And so we're so pleased. So without further ado, Dr. Mannings, please share with us some of your remarks. We would be so pleased to hear from you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and I apologize for this technological mix-up. You would think that being from MIT, I would have these things under control, and I can assure you it's the worst place to be from with regard to simple technology. I'm so honored. I mean, I really am, and this honor has lasted for at least the last 40 years. Why do I say that? I remember very distinctly when my book, Black Apollo of Science, The Life of Ernest Everett Just, came out, and the first audience I spoke to was a group of Omega men out in Kansas City. They were holding their grand conclave, and they welcomed me so heartily. I can remember the lines, hundreds of men waiting for me to sign their books. And it just showed me the respect and admiration they had for one of their founders, Ernest Everett Just. And I'll never forget that kind of accolade coming from this group. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Ernest Everett Just was a pioneer. He was a pioneer in science. He is a pioneer in so many other areas. He's someone that we as a race have to be immensely proud of. I first came across him when I was a little kid in Dillon, South Carolina. There was nothing said about him, but his picture was being placed up in the month of February, just as we are now. About this time, our elementary school teachers would just put up the pictures of people like Mary McLeod Bethune, Charles Drew, Ernest Everett Just. And there was something in his picture that made me very, very curious about this man. Who was he? I knew he was from South Carolina, but that was the extent. And I went through high school. By the way, I finished high school right down the road from you in North Haven, Connecticut. That I spent 1 year there, and then I went from there to University in Cambridge, Harvard, and stayed there. And from there went to MIT and never moved. But it was then and there that I knew that I wanted to say something about this man. But I went through undergraduate years in mathematics and the history of mathematics, and I pursued that as a graduate student. And after I became a first year assistant professor on the tenure line, I said, I'm going to just focus on what I want to. I'd done my doctoral work on German mathematics, and that was all well and good, but I wanted to look at the role of African Americans in science and technology. And to that end, I started out with 4 case studies. E. Just was among them, and I found myself forever going back to his case study rather than the others, because I could immediately see how his life expanded into so many areas. And it was about 6 months into the research on these other 3 African American scientists that I decided to focus in on E. Just. And that whole experience of researching and writing this book is itself another book. I mean, it brought me into the world of Black history and culture that very few people will ever get a chance to experience. I mean, you see the variety and the richness of a group and race of people, and people like E. Just, Alan Roy Locke, people like Charles Drew. These are people that we need to know about, read about, understand, because these are the people who made the kinds of sacrifices for all of us. And in the case of Just, I particularly admire him because he was very interested in getting this fraternity started. The students had the idea, but he had also, he loved fraternity. And they came to him and they bonded together and started Omega Psi Phi, which has flourished and has been one of the hallmarks of Black men, in this country. So that's just one aspect. Now, Just represented excellence, merit, and excellence, and he didn't care, who he demanded of, but he demanded it of everyone. His own work was extraordinary during its time, but it didn't get the recognition that it should have. He spent years in Europe in a self-imposed exile. He could not really accommodate himself to the kinds of racism and racist attitudes that existed in this country. So he went to Europe, and it shows you the depth of his feeling, because in Europe, Nazism and fascism were emerging, and he must have felt more comfortable there than he did here, and it was an extraordinary choice. There were many other things going on, but he ultimately came back in 1940, and he died in Washington, D.C. The story is told, the book is really from 1883 to 1941. And it seems to have spoken to a lot of people and still speaks to people, because today I get so many calls from present day scientists who say, "You've told my story." They say, "This is still what's happening today." And it's a complicated story. It's not one of, where you can just say oh, this person's right, that person's right. It's a very complicated, nuanced story that shows that African Americans are people. They do not have to be perfect people in order to command the respect and rights that we give others. So it's a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. I have had the greatest joy seeing the effects of the book. What do I mean by that? I mean the many professorships at universities that have been established under E.E. Just's name, the foundations that have emerged, the science clubs, the student organizations. It has influenced science at all levels, and I'm particularly pleased when I see elementary school students going into science and being motivated by that life story. Children's books have been written around, the original research, and that's always a pleasure. And that's what we have to do. We have to tell the story of our own people and bring our young boys and girls into the whole thing, a whole realm of science and technology. And we are all indebted to Ernest Everett Just for providing one entry point. Thank you very much.
Very much. To really round out the experience of Ernest E. Just, I would like to now ask Dr. Blaine Kopp, the director of the E.E. Just Environmental Studies Program at Kimball Union Academy, to present to us information regarding that program. For those of us who are very much aware of the work of Ernest E. Just, we know that he finished high school at an institution that is now known as South Carolina State University in Orangeburg. His mother, Mary, was able to get him into Kimball Union Academy, a prep school in New Hampshire, Meriden, New Hampshire. And that institution saw fit to name its environmental studies program after Dr. Just. And I asked Dr. Blaine Kopp to speak to us about that program. So if you will, please welcome Dr. Blaine Kopp.
Thank you so much. I take it you can hear me at the moment. In a moment, I'm going to share my screen, and unfortunately, I don't have two screens. So once I do, I won't be seeing you. So if there's a question that comes up in the chat, I'll need somebody to unmute themselves and alert me, so that I'm aware that there's a question or a problem. Yeah, my name is Blaine Kopp. I am the chair of environmental studies at Kimball Union Academy. I'm serving currently also as the chair of the science department. I'm sort of reinvented myself as a teacher prior to coming to Kimball Union, or you'll hear me call it KUA. About 12 years ago now, I was a marine research ecologist. And so it's opportune and interesting that I should find myself sitting in a lab looking out the window across the hall at a poster of a man who studied marine invertebrates as his model organism for much of his research. I'm not a historian, a science historian, so anything that I get correct in what I'll share with you The credit goes to the scholars like Dr. Manning and the help of our archivist here at Kimball Union. And any mistakes I make are entirely my own. I want to thank Dr. Thompson for hosting the meeting and sponsoring the event, and particularly for Dr. Foster for assuring me that that the folks in the room at the meeting today would have interest in hearing a little bit about the confluence of a great scientist with a small New England rural boarding school. So that said, let me see if I can share my screen. Oh, let's see. I think we're going to need to, Nicholas, we're going to need to toggle that over so that I can share. We practiced that earlier. There we go. All right. So hopefully you're able to see that in the room. Not somebody can stop me if that's not the case. Kimball Union is a There we go. So this is an image of Kimball Union Academy. We're a small boarding school of about 340 students. We're approximately 1/4 day students, 3/4 boarders, and about 1/4 of our population is international students, and 3/4 domestic. So you might reasonably ask why KUA would have an environmental studies or environmental institute, an environmental studies program named after Dr. Just. And this is the poster I was showing you. I look out my lab window into the hallway at this poster every day. So Dr. Just was unequivocal, as you heard a moment ago. He was a student at Kimball Union Academy. He was unequivocally our most prominent and influential graduate in the STEM fields. And he is among our most accomplished graduates in any field. And we're an academy that's got a history of well over 200 years. So that's a pretty impressive accomplishment. Ironically, Ernest or Dr. Just never studied science while he was at Kimball Union Academy. We didn't offer science in 1900. Students coming to Kimball Union studied the classics. They studied Latin or Greek, oration, literature. It wasn't until he attended Dartmouth College that he discovered his passion for science. So I'm going to talk a little more about this part of his life. This is a high school, and I think understanding what he did and overcame to be a high school student is powerful. And I'm just going to really hover over for a moment what he went on to do. So more of us are familiar with the fact that he went on to become an experimental, accomplished experimental embryologist and developmental biologist. He had diverse research interests, and he was really interested in the role of cell cytoplasm. I think what was most interesting for me as a student was learning how he challenged the dogma of early development of fertilized eggs. That dogma was that it was driven all by genetics, and he had a really passionate focus and informed thinking about the role of cytoplasm, the cell surface, and appropriately for an environmental program, he was the influence of environment on gene expression. So these were his test organisms. Like all experimental biologists or developmental biologists of his era, he needed test organisms. Marine invertebrates were the test organism of choice because you could hold them in captivity. They produced tremendous numbers of gametes, egg and sperm, and he could then use egg and sperm to create zygotes that he could study the early developmental phases of their life. So he studied with sea urchins and sand dollars. Both of those are echinoderms, and also with nereid worms, polychaete worms. And one of the things that I first learned about Dr. Just's work was I learned in college. I actually attended Dartmouth, took a class in developmental biology of marine invertebrates, And it was there that I started hearing about some of his work. In particular, I remember learning about what is known as a fast block cellular barriers that prevent eggs from becoming fertilized by more than one spermatozoa. And that was his work. And I wasn't even aware at the time who, you know, the man that I was reading literature about. He went on to write two seminal books, one on the cell surface and one on experimental methods. He was an exceptionally careful and thorough experimentalist, and over 70 research manuscripts in the fields I've listed there. But as a younger man, how did he find his way to us so that he could move on to Dartmouth? And his, you know, his early education and his pathway to his early education, I think, is really significantly inspirational to, certainly to my students. You know, the story that we know is that he was homeschooled. His mom was an educator. He was homeschooled until age 13, when he left to attend as we just heard, the Colored Normal Industrial, Agricultural, and Mechanical College in South Carolina. He was there until age 16 and left with credentials that would allow him to teach. But he did not. He continued on. He or his mother probably saw an advertisement like this one. This one actually comes from the New York Times, but Kimball Union was publishing them in other other venues as well, including a publication called the Christian Endeavor World. So that may be where he picked up the knowledge about the academy. The cost of the academy was at the time was $200, and he worked his way up. So he just found himself a job on a boat that allowed him to get from Charleston to New York City. He arrived with the clothes that he was carrying, an extra pair of shoes, and $5 in his pocket. He got a job in New York in a restaurant that allowed him to earn his first year's tuition and a train ride from New York City to Vermont, where he caught a stagecoach to Kimball Union Academy. And when he got off that train, off the coach, this is probably what he was a long way from home. He was a long way from everything. Kimball Union was not a big town in those days. And also there weren't many trees. We had cut them all down. We went from, I think, 98% forested at one point to this time, I think we were only about 45% forested because of the lumbering and the sheep farming in the area. And this is what the academy looked like at the time that he was here. So I'm going to pause there. You can scout and see if you can find him. This is the class of 1903. And he excelled at everything he did here. He was truly exceptional. He was the editor-in-chief of the school newspaper. He competed very successfully in track and field. He graduated at the top of his class. He was a member of the Philadelphian Society and the men's debating team. He was selected to be the senior orator and also deliver a class prophecy at his graduation baccalaureate. He won the Fisk Prize for Excellence in Senior Essay Writing and went on to deliver that essay in his prize-winning speech, Government Ownership of Monopolies. So no science in the picture, but clearly a really talented intellect. So that's how he got here. What do we look like now? This is Kimball Union Academy. Looks a lot different from it did from the days when Dr. Just was here. As I mentioned earlier, we're about 340 students this year. We have a writer in that area, about 60 faculty, 340 students, about 60-40 male to female ratio. And so as you hear a little bit about our school and our program, at the risk of poaching talent, I hope that you'll be wondering if there's not someone that you know that this would find this an inspiring place. There's our environmental center. The environmental program was launched in 1995, and we built the lab, greenhouse, and environmental wing to our science building in '99. So I'm going to go through relatively quickly and just talk about, like, what do we do here. One of the foundations of our environmental program is that we really strongly are firmly in the philosophy of what we call project-based, place-based, and experiential education. So we want our students putting their hands on the material and doing the work, doing the science, doing the experiment, and we want the science and the experiments to be relevant to our location. About 2/3 of our graduates will graduate with at least one environmental course. So our students are off taking sort of the classic high school curriculum, chemistry, biology, physics, but then many will opt in and take one of these courses, perhaps in lieu of another course or in addition to. So these are some of the courses that we offer, or these are all of the courses that we offer right now that are environmentally themed. Include a lot of field research where we can. This is a wildlife biology class. There's a marine biology class that I offered. One of my students, Winsome, working on articulating the skeleton of a harbor porpoise. A course, an upper level course. So some of our courses are lower level courses, like the wildlife biology and marine biology, very accessible to the broad range of students, and easy for them to engage and get inspired by. Other courses, this is a photo of two students working for an upper level elective, the special topics in science research course. They were developing their own experiments on the prevalence of microplastics in filter feeders, in clams. So we would make weekly trips to the supermarket to buy clams and quahogs and mussels, and they were digesting them in sodium hydroxide and filtering and counting microplastic particles to see how much microplastics we were getting in our food sources. We also have a STEM Scholars Program. So our students who really identify strongly as scientists, engineers, mathematicians, who want to organize their activities, their extracurriculars and their summer activities and their scholarship around being a STEM student, can do that. And they graduate with, and there's some thresholds that they need to accomplish, but they graduate with a credential, a STEM scholar credential. We also have a Cullman Scholars Program, and this is sort of at the other end.
Dr. Kopp?
Yes.
We're going to ask you to round out for us.
Sure, I can round out. So I'm going to toggle through just a few slides then. So we've got our Cullman Scholars Program with some examples of the students, a very strong extracurricular program with some programs that we are sort of our capstone programs that allow students to engage in sustainability on campus in a meaningful way. I'll finish quickly, but I will point out that a number of our extracurricular programs are run as social enterprises. And by social enterprises, what I mean is that they're using entrepreneurial tactics, economic tactics, to achieve a social good. So our pork project, you saw a few photos of kids working growing pigs. We can calculate a carbon balance of that project and an economic outcome from not having food waste go to a landfill. So I think that I'll toggle through a few photos there. We have maple sugaring, beekeeping, kids working in all numbers of extracurricular activities that supplement their work at the academy. In all cases, it's not just the doing of the project, but it's engaging in the activities in a scientific way. So I'll finish there, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to contemplate whether or not there is a student in your life or a colleague in your life that might be interested in joining us or collaborating with us. We always have applications open for students. We're looking actively for both early career and a mid to late career educators for upper level chemistry and physics and an upper level mathematics position this year as well. And I'm always looking for opportunities to collaborate. So if you're an educator yourself or a student and interested in looking for ways to connect your program with ours, that would be wonderful. So I'm going to see if I can stop sharing my screen.
Well, we certainly want to thank you for participating in this program from the very bottom of our hearts. So let's give them a big round of applause. Dr. Cobb, please know that students in the Bloomfield Public School System is viewing it along with their teachers. So I'm sure that Dr. Thompson and the president of the board, Donald Harris, who's present, will take advantage of your offer to collaborate and to perhaps send some of our students there for your summer program, etc. So there are all types of possibility frontiers. Again, we thank you so very much for participating.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
All right. Now we know the men of Omega why Dr. Ernest Just loved Kimball Academy so very, very much. So now, moving on with our program, it is my delight to introduce to you Dr. Martha Brackeen Harris. Dr. Harris is a longtime educator, primarily in the independent school systems. She brings a wealth of knowledge and experience, and we've asked her to share her knowledge of one of our nation's greatest medical doctors and scientists, Dr. Charles Drew. Let's give Dr. Martha Brackeen Harris a round of applause.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Foster, for hosting this. I always love, I know I'm usually going to get in trouble when you call me and say I have something for you to do, but I'm always happy to do it because we always have great results. Thank you, Dr. Thompson and Mr. Chair, for letting this be in Bloomfield, because I actually taught science in Bloomfield many years ago. So it's always nice to be able, first of all, to know that we have Bloomfield students on this call, and just to be back and in the whole educational environment. Even though I spent most of my career in independent schools, I did begin in the schools in Philadelphia and Bloomfield Public Schools. So I've been in both. In 1947, Dr. Charles Drew said, "So much of our energy is spent in overcoming the constricting environment in which we live that little energy is left for creating new ideas or things. Whenever, however, one breaks out of this rather high-walled prison of the Negro problem. By virtue of some worthwhile contribution, not only is he himself allowed more freedom, but part of the wall crumbles. And so it should be the aim of every student in science to knock down at least one or two bricks of that wall by virtue of his own accomplishment. Those are powerful words. Dr. Charles Richard Drew, who was born in 1904, think about that time where he was born, when he was born and what was going on in the environment around him. And he died in 1950. He knew what it felt like to live in a constricting environment. He knew that he couldn't scale the wall or break it down completely, but that didn't stop him from trying. I have the honor to share with you the life of this brilliant scientist who broke barriers at a time when de jure and de facto segregation racially divided America. He became one of the most important scientists in the 20th century. In fact, he was all about the blood. Let's look at the stony road that he had to navigate to knock down some of those bricks. Think about how important blood is in our lives. Think about the consequences of not being able to get blood when you need it. I'm a witness. For many years in our nation's history, the notion of blood was used as a social and legal principle of racial classification that was prominent in the 20th century in the United States. The one-drop rule, as it is called, asserted that any person with even one ancestor or one drop of black blood is considered black. Imagine the power that people gave to blood, to that one drop of blood. That code of one drop ensured that the racial caste system and later segregation would be prominent for many years to come. Let me tell you about Dr. Charles Drew's life. He was born in Washington, D.C., and was the oldest son of Richard Drew, a carpet layer, and Nora Burrell Drew, who was a graduate of the minor normal school. At that time, the normal school was where they prepared teachers, although she may never actually have worked as a school teacher. But as a mother of four, you can be sure she taught. So as a young child in elementary school, he loved swimming. In fact, so much that he earned many medals during his elementary years. He attended Dunbar High School in DC, which is named after Paul Laurence Dunbar, one of my favorite poets and the first influential Black poet in American literature. Dunbar High was an academically elite public school. Despite being racially segregated by law, in fact, it was the first public high school for African Americans in the District of Columbia and the United States of America. So he got an excellent education, but he chose to get in addition to that, to play football, basketball, and other sports. We never know what we do and where it's going to lead us. Unfortunately, during that time, his sister was sick from tuberculosis and died of the pandemic influenza in 1920. This may have been a factor in his interest in medicine. Isn't it interesting how we circle back? However, sports ended up being his ticket to college. He attended Amherst College on a sports scholarship. There, he distinguished himself on the track and football teams, as well as academically. By the way, he was also initiated into Omega Psi Phi fraternity, incorporated in 1923 in the Alpha Psi chapter while attending Amherst. Drew had a dream to attend medical school, but as so many of us, he didn't have enough money to pursue this dream. So he worked as a biology instructor and a coach for Morgan College, now Morgan State University in Baltimore, for 2 years, and quit because he decided, I'm going to pursue my dream. Even though at that time, a few of the Ivy League colleges on the East Coast did admit a few Blacks to medical school, only Meharry Medical School in Tennessee and Howard University Medical School in DC were still open. These were two of the about seven medical schools that were open at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. So as many aspiring doctors did in 1928, he enrolled at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. Many people started to go to, Blacks started to go to international schools because there was more room, and that's how they could follow their dream. While at McGill, he was a top student. He really came into his own in science. He won a prize in neutral anatomy and was a member of the Alpha Omega Alpha, a medical honor society. He graduated in 1933, second in his class, and he earned both a Doctor of Medicine and Master of Surgery degree. He did his internship and residency at the Royal Victoria Hospital and the Montreal General Hospital. Life happens, and his father died, so he decided to return back to the United States. He became an instructor at Howard University's medical school in 1935. The following year, he did a surgery residence at Freedman's Hospital in DC, in addition to working at the university. In 1938, Drew received a Rockefeller Fellowship to study at Columbia University, and he trained at the Presbyterian Hospital in New York City. There, he continued his exploration of blood-related matters and developed a method for processing and preserving blood plasma, or blood without cells. This was an important discovery because plasma lasts much longer than whole blood, and this makes it possible to be stored or banked for longer periods of time. He discovered that the plasma could be dried and then reconstituted when needed. His research served as the basis of his doctoral thesis, Banked Blood, and he received his Doctor of Science degree in 1940. Drew became the first African American to earn this degree from Columbia. His work. Drew not only excelled in his research, but he was also a pioneer for social justice. You'll hear about that a little later. He continued his medical research and made some groundbreaking discoveries in the storage and processing of blood for transfusions. World War II happened, and Drew was asked to head up a special medical effort known as Blood for Britain. He organized the collection and processing of blood plasma from several New York hospitals and sent the shipments of these life-saving materials overseas to treat casualties of the war. According to one report, Drew helped collect roughly 14,500 pints of plasma. In 1941, Drew spearheaded another blood bank effort, this time for the American Red Cross. He worked on developing a blood bank to be used for U.S. military personnel, but not long after his tenure there, he became frustrated with the military's request for segregating the blood donated by African Americans. At first, the military did not want to use the blood from African Americans, but later they said it could be used, but only used for African American soldiers. I guess they were afraid of that one drop code. Drew was outraged by this racist policy, so he resigned his post after only a few months. However, his program became a model for the Red Cross pilot program to mass produce dry plasma in New York in February 1941, with Drew as assistant director and later for the National Blood Donor Service. Among his innovations were bloodmobiles, mobile blood donation trucks with refrigerators. The work sealed his reputation as a pioneer and earned him the title Father of the Blood Bank. Ironically, the Red Cross excluded African Americans from even donating blood, making Drew himself ineligible to participate in the very program he established. That policy was later modified to accept donations. However, the institution upheld the racial segregation of blood, which throughout the war Drew openly criticized as unscientific and insulting to African Americans. After creating two of the first blood banks, Drew returned to Howard University in 1941. He served as a professor there, heading up the university's Department of Surgery. He also became the chief surgeon at Freedman's Hospital. Later that year, he became the first African American examiner for the American Board of Surgery. His awards. In 1944, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People honored Drew with its 1943 Spring Art Medal for the highest and noblest achievement by an African American during the preceding year or years. The award was given in recognition of Drew's blood plasma collection and distribution efforts. In 1981, Drew was issued a stamp in his honor in the U.S. Postal Service's Great American Stamp Series. I still have some. I bought them, then I didn't want to use them because, you know, they were just so precious to me. Later work and death. For the final years of his life, Drew remained an active and highly regarded medical professional. He continued to serve as chief surgeon at Freedman's Hospital and as a professor at Howard University. On April 1st, 1950, almost at 46 years old, Drew and three other physicians attended a medical conference at the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. Drew had been up late the night before performing surgery, and he was behind the wheel early in the morning when his vehicle crashed near Burlington, North Carolina. The other passengers survived, but Drew succumbed to his injuries. He left behind a wife, Minnie, and 4 children. Some say that he was refused a blood transfusion, but there's no evidence that that was true. When they found him, he was near death. They got him to a hospital and worked on him for about a half hour before he succumbed. So, Dr. Charles Richard Drew broke barriers in a racially divided America to become one of the most important scientists of the 20th century. His pioneering research and systematic developments in the use and preservation of blood plasma during World War II not only saved thousands of lives, but innovated the nation's blood banking process and standardized procedures for long-term blood preservation and storage techniques adapted by the American Red Cross. So his work still helps us today. That work continues saving lives. So I say we give him credit for knocking out more than the 1 or 2 bricks that he asked others to do from that wall. Millions of lives have been saved because of Charles Richard Drew. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joaquin Harris. So informative. We appreciate you so very, very much. And as a point of personal pride, we were fortunate enough to get Dr. Drew's daughter to visit Bloomfield High done back in the 90s, Dr. Charlene Drew. So we're just so pleased. Now, I have the privilege and the honor to introduce a colleague, Dr. Gloria Brown, who's a longtime professor of chemistry and mathematics at Central Connecticut State University. And Dr. Brown will share with us information on Dr. Jane Cook Wright, one of the pioneers in the treatment of cancer. So please, Dr. Gloria Brown, State University.
So first, I'd like to thank the organizers of the Ernest E. Just Symposium, and specifically Dr. Benjamin Foster for inviting me to present a very important and very impressive woman, Dr. Jane Cook Wright. Now, I had never heard about her, and maybe some of you have, and maybe some of you have not. If you have not, I'd like to introduce her to you. If you have, I'd like to refresh your memory and maybe expand your knowledge of Dr. Jane Cook Wright. She was both a pioneer and a researcher, and surgeon. Now, Dr. Cook Wright came from a barrier-breaking medical family. And her father, Louis Tompkins Wright, was a physician. He was the first African-American doctor at a public hospital. Also, he was one of the first African-American graduates from Harvard Medical School, and he founded the Harlem Hospital Cancer Research Center. Her grandfather, Sian, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Ketchum Wright, was also a physician. He was born into slavery, but after the Civil War, he entered Ben Cake Medical College, which later became Meharry Medical College, and this is a historically Black institution. From there, he graduated as valedictorian. After his wife died, his wife married another physician, William Fletcher Penn, who was the first African-American graduate of Yale Medical College. She also had an uncle, Harold West, who was a physician, and he became president of Meharry Medical College. And then her younger sister, Barbara, also became a physician. So you can see, indeed, she came from a medical family, a barrier-breaking medical family. She herself was born in Manhattan, November 20th, 1919, and she died in February 19, 2013. So she lived to be 93 years old. As I've said, her father was a physician, her mother was a public school teacher, and we can see where later on that influenced part of her career. Now, as a child, she went to the Ethical Culture Fieldstone School, and there she was involved in a variety of activities. She was the school's yearbook art editor, she was captain of the swimming team, but her favorite subjects were math and science. She entered Smith's College on a scholarship, and her desire was to major in the arts, but her father influenced her to prepare for medical school. However, while she was there, she swam on the varsity swim team, and she had a passion for the German language. She lived in the school's German house for a while, but she prepared herself to enter medical school. After graduating in 1942 from Smith College, she entered the New York Medical School on a scholarship again. And She graduated with honors in 1949 in 3 years from a program which normally takes 4 years, and this was due to World War II. Immediately, she entered internship at the Bellevue Hospital and then continued with residency. She was married to David Jones Jr., an outstanding attorney, a Harvard Law School graduate, and they had 2 daughters, Jane and Allison, neither of whom went into medicine. Now, her professional career. She continued her residency at Harlem Hospital after finishing up her internship, and there she became the chief resident. And then in 1949, she was hired there as a staff physician, and she was hired as a staff physician with the New York City Public School. As I said, her mother being a public school no doubt influenced her to take an interest in the health needs of the children in the public school. However, she continued as a visiting physician at Harlem Hospital. She joined her father at the Harlem Hospital Cancer Research Center, which he had founded. This she did in 1949. And then when he died in 1952, she succeeded him as the director. In 1955, she became the associate professor of surgical research at New York University and the director of cancer chemotherapy research at New York University Medical Center and its affiliate Bellevue and University Hospitals. In 1967, she was named professor of surgery, head of the cancer chemotherapy department, and associate dean at New York Medical College, her alma mater. She worked there for 20 years until she retired in 1987. However, she did not stop her involvement in the progress of cancer, of chemotherapy in treating cancer. The National Breast Cancer Foundation considers her to be a very outstanding person in this area. In fact, they named her the godmother of chemotherapy. She and her father were not just interested in doing research, they were interested in making chemotherapy an accessible method of cancer treatment for everyone. This was a new development. It was not well known, it was not well practiced, partly because the available drugs and dosages were not very well defined. And it was still considered to be an experimental approach, even considered to be the last resort. However, they were determined to make sure that whatever research she conducted had an impact in the clinical setting. And so with her father, they shifted cancer research and treatment development. Now, so up to this time, tumor cells had been studied in the lab outside of the human body, but they conducted clinical research that demonstrated the power of chemotherapy in targeting cancer. They took cells, tumor cells from a body, from a human body, and studied them in the lab. And so she redefined chemotherapy. In fact, she considered it, she called it the Cinderella of cancer research. And her very important contribution was not just using a single drug, but using combination therapy, where multiple medications were used in a precise order. So this was a novel approach that was used by Wright and her colleagues. Previously, they had been doing research in mice, but she showed that it could be followed by actually giving patients the drug and seeing what happened as a result. So she developed this method of testing and selecting the most effective course of chemotherapy for a particular tumor in an individual patient. So they would take the cells from the patient and culture them in the lab, and then they would treat the cells with a variety of chemotherapeutic agents and adjust the treatment according to the individual and assess the response. So these were the early steps in what is done very commonly now, and referred to as personalized medicine. Now, the basis of this process is the fact that cells require folic acid to produce certain types of amino acids, which eventually become proteins, and also to produce purines, which are needed for DNA and RNA. Folic acid antagonists are substances that interrupt the function of folic acid. Folic acid is needed, and folic acid is needed, as I said, in the development of these cells. However, the antagonists block the folic acid in the body and prevent the cells from making new strands of DNA or of making new proteins in cell division, which is called mitosis. And then the folic acid antagonists actually affect both cancer and non-cancer cells. However, because cancer cells replicate and proliferate so much faster than other cells, they are more greatly affected, and so they are unable to repair and they die. Now, in the process of doing research, they tried different drugs, and they found that those which interrupted the action of folic acid were the most potent against a wide variety of tumors, such as different types of leukemia, Hodgkin's disease, lymphosarcoma, melanoma, breast cancer. I also had prostate cancer in the list, but I checked with my daughter, who is a physician, since I'm a chemist, not a biologist, and she has worked in a cancer hospital. And she told me that prostate cancer, it's no longer used for prostate cancer. In fact, it's found that with prostate cancer, it has the opposite effect, possibly because of immunosuppression on the part of the patient. However, she added that it's used in other non-chemotherapy situations, such as treating rheumatoid arthritis and cirrhosis. It's one of the classes of drugs that's called DMARD, which is disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs. Dr. Jane Cook Wright has left a huge legacy in science and otherwise. She's called the mother of chemotherapy. She's recognized as a woman who changed the landscape of oncology. She's credited with establishing precision medicine, which I already explained, that is, developing a non-surgical procedure and developing chemotherapy to target tumors in previously inaccessible areas, such as the kidney and the spleen, using a catheter. After a 40-year career, which established a legacy of innovation, and during which she changed the face of chemotherapy and medicine, she also, during this time, produced 135 research articles and papers published on cancer chemotherapy. Methotrexate, which is the drug that she found was the most successful as a folic acid antagonist, continues to be the basis of treating many types of cancer. The American Society of Clinical Oncology renamed their prestigious award the Young Investigator Award in her honor. She has received multiple awards. And she was not content to keep this information in her research lab or in New York or in the United States. She led delegations of cancer researchers to Africa, China, Eastern Europe, and the former Soviet Union. Now, beyond research, she also has a legacy that is worth noting. While pursuing private research in the New York Medical College, she implemented two programs. One, a new comprehensive program to study stroke, heart disease, and cancer, and also a program to instruct doctors in chemotherapy. She founded the American Society of Clinical Oncology to educate doctors and provide research grants. And interestingly, the other members were 6 doctors who were all white male. In 1964, she was appointed by President Lyndon B. Johnson to the President's Commission on Heart Disease, Cancer, and Stroke. And then between 1966 and 1970, she served on the National Cancer Advisory Board, whose mission was, 1, to establish a national network of treatment centers for critical cancer diseases, and also to promote increased communication between research institutions. And then we can recognize her too for many firsts. She was the first of 2 daughters in a barrier-breaking family to pursue medicine during an era where women and African Americans faced perverse discrimination. She was the first Black woman to be named Associate Dean of a national recognized medical institution, that is New York Medical College, and this was in 1967. She was the first Black oncologist. She pioneered the use of the drug methotrexate to treat breast and skin cancer. Her research groups were the first to report the use of nitrogen mustard agents as well as folic acid antagonists or blockers as cancer treatments. In 1967, she was the highest ranked African American woman at a nationally recognized medical institution. She was the only Black member, as I said just now, of the American Society of Clinical Oncologists. And this society's aim was to educate doctors and provide research grants. In 1971, she was the first woman president of the New York Cancer Society. And she was the only woman and the only African American on the board of the American Society of Clinical Oncologists. She is a wonderful, a great role model for female minorities because she overcame both gender and racial bias. She succeeded in a largely white male profession. She was undeterred by the prevailing view of many physicians who not only disregarded but ridiculed chemotherapy, which was then an emerging cancer treatment using chemical agents rather than surgery, and they thought it was ineffective. But she was undeterred by that attitude. She pursued in her research, and we can see that she succeeded. She succeeded not just in a career, but also as a family woman. And she took a 6-month leave from Harlem Hospital while chief resident for the birth of her first daughter, Jane. Now I'm encouraging you to put her name, Jane Cook Wright, in Google or any other search engine, and you'll see how many articles there are about her. It was my privilege to learn about her, and I'd like to encourage you to, especially the young ones who are listening, to be encouraged and to know that you can accomplish whatever you desire to do. And so I want to thank you for being a very engaging and attentive audience. And I trust that my presentation has been of worth.
And we thank you so very, very much. I want to just share that I had the great honor to meet Dr. Jane Cook Wright while serving as an administrator in the Central Harlem, New York school system. She was so engaged and concerned about our children and their education. Tremendous woman, and her accomplishments has helped humankind. We're moving right along with our program, and it is now my distinct pleasure to present to our audience a noted and very much engaged historian, Dr. Stacy Close of Eastern Connecticut State University. Please welcome this young man and historian, Dr. Stacy Close.
Let me first thank the Institute for Cross-Cultural Awareness and Transformative Education and Dr. Benjamin Foster, as well as the Bloomfield Public Schools and the members of Omega Psi Phi fraternity for providing the opportunity for us to share not only historical knowledge about these wonderful scientists and pioneers in STEM, but also providing an opportunity to be a conduit for growth for our students, particularly those here in Bloomfield. I say that because I have two little ones who are in school here in Bloomfield for that reason. When it comes to Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, I first became aware of Dr. Daniel Hale Williams during my summer reading programs that my mother would have for all the children in the family. But more detail on his life came one Christmas break when my sister was taking a course at Morris Brown College, and she was reading John Hope Franklin's From Slavery to Freedom and some additional work at that time. And amongst the people that I was able to skim through the book and find with Dr. Daniel Hale Williams. And then I began to read the entire volume and other works that she had. And his importance to us in the African American community not only is evident, but is also part of a long tradition within the African American community. I say that for this reason. If you read the works of Lorenzo Green, if you read the works of William Pearson and others, they write about the African presence and the importance of medical care. Cotton Mather noted that in watching African American women, he found that they were the innovators when it came to innovating medicine in New England, because they were the ones who inoculated children and African babies long before the idea was commonplace among others in New England. It's also a world that John Hope Franklin talked about, a world where folk medicine, and particularly folk medicine along the Sea Islands of Georgia and South Carolina, was transformed across the Atlantic to the world of South Carolina and Georgia. It was folk medicine that provided medical care in a time and space when more traditional medicine by the mainstream wasn't really provided at a adequate level to those who happened to be enslaved. But in the work called Medicine and Slavery, Todd Savitt not only talks about the medical practices of the 19th century in America, he also talks about some of the heinous medical treatments that African Americans endured during the 19th century, and some of those procedures that were quite commonplace to the detriment of African Americans. But in terms of understanding greatness in the medical field, one of the things that Dr. Daniel Hale Williams does, he helps us understand the greatness in the medical field. And he also ties us back to the days of folk medicine on the Sea Islands of Georgia and South Carolina. And he also ties us back to the inoculations that Cotton Mather talked about during the colonial period. On the morning of July 10th, 1893, Dr. Daniel Hale Williams had a difficult decision to make. James Cornish, a 24-year-old black man who had been stabbed in a street brawl the night before, was struggling to breathe
and deteriorating really fast. Dr. Williams, or Dr. Dan as he was known to his colleagues and patients, suspected that the knife had pierced the young man's heart. As a result of that, he had to figure out and determine what exactly he needed to do. Well, he decided that doing something meant that he needed to cut open Cornish's heart and repair the pierced pericardium, and he repaired it using sheep's intestine. The result was one of the world's first successful open heart surgeries. Cornish recovered and went on to live a life for a number of decades. What was remarkable about that achievement in 1893 was that it was in an era before antibiotics, blood transfusions, and effective anesthesia. Most medical experts believed that heart surgery at that time was almost invariably fatal. Dr. Williams proved them wrong, and he performed this groundbreaking surgery in a small 12-bedroom hospital serving one of the city's poorest neighborhoods. As far as Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, his early life begins in the small town of Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania in 1856. He came from a family of small business owners and preachers. He was the fifth of 7 children. He dropped out of school to become a shoemaker's apprentice at 12. And his father, a year after, would die of tuberculosis. Wanting to help his family and help himself, he later on worked on a lake on loading boats and cleaning boats. He also worked in an orchestra before opening a barbershop in Egerton, Wisconsin at the age of 17. While working part-time in another barbershop, he trimmed the beard of Henry Palmer, a prominent surgeon who took the young man on as an apprentice. One of the things that we know about in African American history, that a lot of important and genuinely important things to the Black community happen in barbershops. Dr. Foster knows from his days in North Carolina the work of the Spalding family and North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company and how they began an early tie to barbershops. Those in Atlanta know about the Herndon family and the development of Atlanta Mutual Life Insurance Company and those ties to barbershops. Now, for Daniel Hale Williams, that meeting with Henry Palmer, a prominent surgeon, this meeting will allow Williams to go on not only to study and tutor under Henry Palmer, but also to earn a medical degree from the Chicago Medical College, which later became Northwestern University. Now, that move, while it brings prestige in terms of having an MD, it also brings him into the perils of the medical field for Black physicians. Despite the prestigious medical degree, Williams found that he was denied hospital privileges at every Chicago area hospital due to his race. Now, that was typical of the time. Most hospitals didn't allow Black-to-face physicians, even if they allowed Black patients. Nevertheless, Dr. Williams opened a successful private practice, and then he discovered, having a private practice, it was difficult to conduct operations on patients in private homes. What he needed, he understood, and what the country needed was a hospital owned and operated by Black people. Around the time that he was contemplating this need, a friend asked a favor. That friend was Reverend Lewis Reynolds, a popular Chicago pastor. He came to Williams after his sister, Emma Reynolds, was denied access to every nursing training program she attempted to join in Chicago, simply because she was Black. Reverend Reynolds asked Williams if he could help Emma get into a training program. Dr. Williams had a different idea and a different answer. He suggested that why not start a hospital of our own, where they could train dozens and dozens and dozens of Black nurses of their own. This dream became a rallying cry for many in Chicago's Black community. They became inspired with the idea of creating a hospital where Black patients could be treated with equity, with dignity, and respect, just as white patients were in hospitals controlled by white doctors and white administrators. Now, what happens in terms of this cry, many people who supported this effort, they gave from $5 to $10 smaller amounts. But what Dr. Williams noted was that one of the donors was Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass, in 1891, he decided to give his entire speaker fee of $50 to support the building of this new hospital that was so much the dream of Dr. Williams. Building Providence Hospital built a hospital that provided not only a place for Blacks who needed health care, it also provided a hospital with a reputation as one of the best hospitals in the country. And to many in the Black community in Chicago, it was welcomed with pride because it was owned by a Black physician, operated by the Black community, and it treated mostly Black patients. In terms of spreading his message, after his breakthrough 1893 heart surgery, he was invited to practice medicine and give lectures all over the country, particularly in the South. And Williams used his platform to advocate for an interracial hospital network. He felt that Providence should be the first of many hospitals owned and operated by Black people. He argued vehemently that wherever there was a Black community with at least 10,000 residents, they should have their own hospital and their own training program. No matter how difficult it might be to get a program like that off the ground. Now, in 1910, Abraham Flexner, an educator hired by the Carnegie Foundation to study the state of medical education in the US and Canada, he released a damning report about the state of the American medical schools. Fletcher, who had no medical training, wrote in his report that most medical schools were poorly run, underfunded facilities designed only to make a profit rather than to properly train future doctors. As a result, Black medical schools across the country were hit particularly hard as a result of the publication of this report. They went from a high of 14 Black medical schools in the late 1800s to only 2 that survived Fletcher's scathing criticism. The only 2 to survive, Meharry Medical College in Nashville and Freedman's Hospital, now Howard University Hospital in Washington, D.C. Along with only being the only schools left really to train Black doctors, both had something else in common. They had Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, a surgeon and a teacher. And as chief surgeon at Freedman in 1894, he adopted practices that reduced the hospital's mortality rate from 10% to 1.5% after he arrived. He also frequently visited Meharry to perform surgeries and to provide free clinics. His impact went further. He co-founded the National Medical Association, the first professional organization for Black doctors, and he also created an alternative to the American Medical Association, which was racist in policies at the time. And he also performed another breakthrough surgery with his successful repair of a spleen in 1902. And in 1913, he became the first Black surgeon to be accepted into the American Colleges of Surgeons, the ACS. In his latter years, and what I mean by latter years, some 13 years after his award, his most recent award that I mentioned, in 1926, Dr. Williams suffered a stroke. As a result of that, he was forced to retire to Idlewild, Michigan. And many of us who are knowledgeable about American history in general, we know the importance of Idlewild to Black vacationers because it was there that Blacks had a place where they could go on vacation and not have to be confronted with some of the most horrible things about travel in America. It was there that he built a small inn called the Oakmere Hotel, which welcomed guests from all over the country. He stayed in Idlewild until his death 5 years later at the age of 75. In his will, he bequeathed, in our terms today, $350,000 to Black organizations. Some of the money went to building an operating room at a new interracial hospital in Chicago's South Side. Another chunk of the money was set aside as financial aid for Black medical school students at Freedman's and at Meharry. As far as Dr. Williams' legacy, Providence Hospital lives on. And what I mean by lives on Providence Hospital opened back up in 1993. It also had some famous patients, including one Michelle Obama, who was born there in 1964. The Daniel Hale Williams Society, created in 2018 at his alma mater Northwestern, has devoted its time to recruiting Black men into medical school. And then they provide them with mentorship, with financial support as they work their way through towards their medical degree. It also has a legacy for my family. Griffin Hospital in my home county opened in the 1940s in Southwest Georgia. It was the only Black-owned and run hospital in Southwest Georgia. The founder and principal physician was a student of Meharry during the age of Dr. Williams. The Meharry student who started Griffin Hospital in Southwest Georgia also delivered my oldest sister in 1963, the same sister who introduced me to more and deeper writings on Daniel Hale Williams during her days in college. Locally in Hartford, Dr. Patrick Henry Clay Arms, Hartford's first Black doctor. He was a graduate of Howard University's medical program. And it is that same school that Dr. Daniel Hale Williams had a prominent impact during his days at Howard. So in terms of legacy, our legacy in terms of healthcare not only is prominently impacted by Dr. Williams, but for those in the greater Hartford region, for many of the doctors from 1906 on into the 1960s, most, as far as Black doctors in the area, had ties to Howard University Medical School, the same Howard University Medical School that was once Freedman's Hospital, but also once home to Dr. Daniel Hale Williams. Thank you.
Let's give another round of applause to Dr. Close and to all our presenters. We are so pleased to have had the opportunity to facilitate this symposium. We thank Dr. Thompson, Donald Harris Jr., the men of Tau Iota, Omega Psi Phi fraternity, and the African American Studies program at Central Connecticut State University for assisting us in this tremendous effort of sharing information regarding the tremendous contribution of African Americans during Black History and or African American History Month. We're just so elated to be able to do this. Let me say this. We named it after Dr. Ernest Just, because Just was very much dedicated to the study of cells biology. And as you have heard today, cells are considered to be the basic unit of life. And it's connected to the various medical innovators that we have learned about today. As I said, for those of you who have gotten the flyer, we've decided to hold up on sharing more information about Dr. Walter McAfee. We're going to do another symposium that will be dedicated to his momentous contribution to the world. So now, again, we want to thank all of you from throughout the country who have logged in and participated in this occasion, this learning activity. We're going to bring back to you now Dr. James Thompson, Superintendent of Bloomfield Public Schools, and he will be followed by Dr. Felton Ovest, Director of African American Studies at Central Connecticut State University. A big round of applause for the foresight and support of Dr. James Thompson.
Congratulations to Jose Feliciano was the recipient of our Student Science Award. Jose Feliciano is a junior at Bloomfield High School. He participates on the junior varsity basketball team, as well as the varsity football team. Jose is a wonderful student and an amazing citizen. He has analytical skills and a strong work ethic that will prove useful along his educational journey. We're very proud of him. And I'm going to say, Jose, as you receive this gift, always remember the importance of identifying your passion and pursuing your dreams. Dr. Jess turned his childhood curiosity and passion for science, research, and writing into his life purpose. You can make an impact on your life too. I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today for this very special educational and celebratory event. Thank you. And one other thing before I leave, we are presenting Jose Feliciano with this book. Jose is on, I think we have a picture of him, Black Apollo of Science, The Life of Ernest Everett Just. This is the book.
Dr. Best.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thompson and Dr. Foster and others that participated in this program with the African American Studies program at Central Connecticut State University today. The Bloomfield Public Schools are very special to the African American Studies program, and that African American Studies has worked with the Bloomfield Public Schools in terms of doing internships in African American Studies when Dr. Paul Copes was superintendent, and then Dr. Thompson, and also during the time of Dr. Foster being there as well. We want to thank also Dr. Benjamin Foster, who I would like to give myself as credit, having the wit to hire him to be an adjunct professor of African American Studies, where I serve as director, and also a religious studies professor, where I serve as a course coordinator, for this great work that he's done in bringing all of these projects to Central Connecticut State University. We have hosted African American writers of note, along with the Institute for Cross-Cultural Awareness, and today, African American scientists of note, which of course we've had today. And then we want to invite you to join us on the 24th of this month, which we will conclude having African American theologians of note. So we want to just honor and thank all of you who have been involved. And for all the scholars that have presented today, your work has been exemplary. Dr. Walton Brown Foster, who is the chair of the editorial board of the 1619 Journal of African American Studies, also including Dr. Janet Yates, who's on that board, myself, and others included, will be sending an open invitation for article submissions to the 1619 Journal on these various topics of scholars of note. I also want to thank many of these scientists themselves who have come to present. But in conclusion, I want to also thank a great friend, a good colleague, Dr. Stacy Close, who was at the Ohio State University in the master's program when I was in the PhD program there. And then I was at North Carolina A&T State University in the history department, and he This has been great. Dr. James Thompson, Dr. Foster, Dr. Walton Brown Foster, all of these scholars, we thank you. And I think I see a person here also today that I've been told, of course, we had participation from the AME Zion Church here in Bloomfield, all the faculty and staff that works in African American Studies. We appreciate you. Again, come back on the 24th of this month, where we will conclude with African-American theologians of note. Thank you very much. And to Nick Streifel and all of his wonderful team that work in technology here at Central Connecticut State University. Let's just give all of these presenters an outstanding applause. Thank you for coming, and we'll look forward to seeing you again. Have a good day.
And that will conclude, and I'd like to again recognize a member of the board for the Institute of Cross-Cultural Awareness, Lyndon Kirkland. Thank you so very much for coming in from Danbury and New York City. So thank you so very, very much, Lyndon. That concludes our program. Thank you. Derek Selden. How could I not mention Derek Selden, a former member of the Bloomfield Board of Education and our town council. Derek Selden is in the house. Thank you, Bill.